Who are you proud of?
Me, and you, and Isaac, and Dada, and Shoshay. I'm proud of everybody in our neighborhood.
That's lovely.
In our whole neighborhood. In Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, too.
You're proud of everybody in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood?
Yes, and everybody in everybody's neighborhoods.
I've been watching this show lately called Food Network Star. Various forms of Bobby Flay-based entertainment have really been my saving grace in pandemic year 2. But I'm loving this ridiculous show, even though it sometimes causes me to crawl up the back of my couch in anxious fits. Food Network Star is a competition where the prize is your own show on Food Network. 12 chefs compete and get eliminated over the course of as many weeks. It combines 2 of my passions, cooking and on-camera presentational skills. Contestants have to be good at both. And usually, they have a lot of skills in the kitchen and are disasters in front of the camera. This gives me a rare opportunity to feel superior, which I really like. I have a level of comfort in front of cameras and microphones that isn't really a matter of skill, of course. It's really just a function of spending more than half my life doing it. You're gonna get pretty good at something when you practice all the time, pretty much always. But there are technical aspects of it that I don't think I even realized until I started watching this show. For instance, timing out 30 and 60 second chunks of speech. The chefs on Food Network Star are always struggling with meeting a time requirement. You can't be under and you can't be over. But for work, I write a lot of these sponsor videos, usually just messages from our CEO for an event or a conference or a TV broadcast, all of which are supposed to be 30 or 60 seconds. And I hit that mark all the time without ever thinking about it. I don't time out the words, I just write what I know is 30 seconds, and then it is. I don't know how I figured that out. Earlier this year, I worked on one sponsor video for a conference from the New Hampshire Businesses for Social Responsibility. They are run by the same UNH Sustainability Org where I met Juliana Good, and they're affiliated with the B Corp certifications that we talked about last year with Rick Wallace. Good gang over there at UNH. They invited me recently to speak to the incoming freshmen at their business school, and I had a blast. I know, me speaking to a business school, shocking and sort of appalling, right? It happened. Anyway, the New Hampshire Businesses for Social Responsibility Conference is where I first encountered today's guest.
Brian Murphy, architect, co-founder of Placework.
Welcome to the last podcast. I'm Zach Little. And today's episode is about Placework Studios and the way that spaces and communities get built and unbuilt and rebuilt again. And it's a glimpse also at the horizon beyond sustainability. I really sound like a walking LinkedIn profile now, don't I? Shocking and sort of appalling, right?
Placework is an architecture and planning firm. We're located in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. The name Placework and why it's not obvious that it's architecture maybe is because we understand architecture as being connected to a place and belonging to a place. So it's more than just the building. It's everything about the place, including the ecology and the sociology of a place.
So we're sitting right now in your office, and there's a bunch of people working right out there. There's been a common internet joke that the roaring 20s we were all promised post-pandemic turned out to be like 3 weeks in June. And that's when this podcast was recorded. It's basically the only time I left the house. Give me a sense of like, what does a day look like in terms of what's the workload? How many current clients are you balancing? Is it always like, is something always coming in as something's going out, or is there a lot of stuff happening at once?
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff happening at once, and projects go in phases from the early conceptual, the planning phase, and then through design, and then you have to document that and prepare it to be constructed, and we're involved through all of that, right through construction until the client moves in. And so thereby, there's always something going on. Their projects are in different phases. So you might be in one phase working on one project at one point in the day, and then you have to tend to another project that's in a completely different phase. So there's some excitement in the work in that regard of the many different things that you can be doing.
Are you good at working that way? Is that is that your preferred way?
Me personally, well, I guess I don't want to go on record saying I'm not good working in that way. But yeah, I mean, it makes me happy to have, that kind of variety and excitement in the day. On the other hand, I'm an introvert, and I like to, sit down and focus on a thing and get deep into it. But the nature of the work doesn't always afford me that opportunity. So I'm also quite happy, going from one thing to the next throughout the course of a day.
Sometimes it lines up nicely, right?
It does.
I have that with my job. I tend to I get involved in a lot of projects all at the same time so that I can jump around as I get bored working on one thing to another.
Yeah.
But then there are days when either just the horizon clears and there's just like one thing you have to do, or you're finishing everything all at once.
Right.
Which is a good feeling too.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're like really thankful to your past self on those days. You're
Yeah.
like, thank you for teeing this up for me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it feels good to plow through a list of things in a day.
Brian's talk at the Social Responsibility Conference was called Cultivating Regenerative Communities. Great title. And as you well know, I love to kick off a podcast interview with some definitions, so we started there. I love that term. Tell me, what is a regenerative community?
Well, I don't know for sure. I made that term up. There's the concept of regeneration in the way we are, the way we live. I mean, it's not a new fancy thing like nature regenerates itself. In architecture and the design world, there's more and more attention toward regenerative design and thinking regeneratively about how we build and how we go about that. Buildings themselves inherently aren't regenerative. They're, in fact, as we do it now, they're degenerative. They're extractive. We extract materials from the earth to make the materials to build the building. And we consume through the life of the building. The building consumes energy. And so over the last several decades, we've been drilling down on this fact of building, and we've been working toward doing having less impact through buildings. Now we're starting to think about how can we move beyond being sustainable, reducing our impact, and moving toward having a positive impact, not just on the planet, but on people and communities. So that is where my mind is right now in this work and what regenerative means to me. And I brought it to that presentation to try to expand it outside of buildings. And in fact, that's what it takes. It takes all of us collectively as a community in the act of building to make decisions about the way we do it, so that in the end we can achieve a regenerative state. And that is, everybody can participate in that beyond the people that own the building and the people that design and make the building.
So I can understand, like just as a regular person, I can understand some like basic concepts of sustainability, like this idea of like carbon offsets, or like, I don't know, you cut down a tree, you plant a tree, which as it turns out isn't, because older trees actually, I've learned recently, trap way more carbon than new trees, which is like why clear cutting is a big deal. But still, so I don't know, you plant 5 trees. I'm not sure how many you have to do, but that's like my like basic sustainability equation. In terms of the idea of a building or any act that would give back and be regenerative, I guess the first thing I can think of is like a solar panel on a roof that generates more electricity than necessary so it feeds back into the grid, right? But what's like another example of that? What's a better example of a concept?
Well, on that kind of technological level, there are a few different things that are, solar panels are good, and that's one thing that I think most people commonly understand as what is sustainability in a building. Putting solar panels on the roof, that's a very visible, palpable, easy to equate way of being sustainable. Other similar things would be, when you build a building, presumably you are taking a piece of the soft earth and putting something hard on it. It might be, it could be just a parking lot, just a piece of asphalt, or it could be a few stories of a building and a roof on top of it. It necessarily means the rain that would have fallen on that spot and absorbed into the earth is now not doing that, and it's going somewhere else.
Okay, so I don't know if you're aware of the artist Jenny Holzer at all, but she works in text, creating various installations and LED signs, and I even saw a granite bench once that she'd inscribed. Her works display a combination of empowering, comforting, and threatening messages. It is in your self-interest to find a way to be very tender is one of the more well-known Jenny Holzer lines. Sometimes there is a luxurious amount of time before anything bad happens is one that I just found, which is pretty good. Anyway, when I heard Brian say that bit about every time you build a building you necessarily destroy a part of the soft earth, I thought to myself, that's a very Jenny Holzer thing to say.
Very simple, basic stuff, and this is stuff that we've always dealt with in buildings, but the way we commonly do it is to send it to a system that absorbs and processes that water and sends it somewhere else. A different way to do that would be to hold that water on the site and let it be there in some capacity and dissipate from there naturally. And there are different, different technologies and different ways to do that, from planted roof, making that roof that replaced the soft earth, making it soft so that it can hold. So there's soil on the, soil on the roof and plants in that soil, and that holds and uses the water. And then less of it is running onto the ground, and when it hits the ground, put it in a place on the ground that can hold it instead of sending it off to a municipal sewer system.
I'm so glad that you brought up water systems, because that is something that we have. I'm on a stormwater committee in my town, and so I had to learn about all of that stuff, and I was fascinated to learn that when it rains, sometimes it just rains too fast for the ground.
Yeah.
And that alone just blew my mind, right? That the water just runs along the surface. I've seen it happen as a kid out playing in the rain, and I never thought about it. So the ways in which we can actually absorb and hold water better than the ground, that's a great example. Okay, I'm glad. So now we got that down.
Yeah, and that's an example of an increasing, hazardous condition with climate change and the change in the water cycle and the change in soil, where the rainstorms are more severe with higher volumes. The soil goes longer without rain sometimes and is not not capable of absorbing that rate of waterfall or rainfall, and it's exacerbating the problem. So,
yeah, it's very interesting to think about that system. Here we go. We're going to transition into system thinking, right?
Yeah.
Think of to think about the system, and the way in which we can play a role to sort of make up for the damage that we've done. But yeah, the other piece of it, the other reason I was like, I got to get this guy on the podcast, is you were talking about this idea of systems thinking. Being a person who always thought more abstract, artistic, whatever, seeing things in the form of systems and thinking about the role that an organization or a person or whatever can play was very illuminating for me. It has really determined the way I've thought for the last couple of years. So I guess I wanted to talk to you about what systems thinking means to you.
It's meaning more and more. All the time, especially in the context of architecture and building. Everything is a system or a part of a system, and to stop and think carefully in the design and planning process to understand a system, and that system could be the building itself. You know, it's packed with systems, just like the human body. It's got, you know, a circulatory system and a respiratory system and a structural system, a skeletal system. So as architects, we've been trained to think in that way to begin with. But to step beyond that and think about the social systems and economic systems and environmental systems outside of that building, and what the impact is and what the synergies are, and how do we recognize those things and capitalize on those things to make the system, the whole system, thrive together with this new addition of a building or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I think that we all think we think narratively. So we always think like beginning, middle, end.
Yeah.
And one piece of, I think, understanding systems is understanding that you're just coming in the middle of something, right? Mm-hmm. And you're moving a piece of it forward as best as you can, but then it just keeps going. And I think people are starting to think this way about stuff like racial justice. And I think it's really informing the way people talk about it. Because there's no we elected Barack Obama, racism ended,
right.
Beginning, middle, end of story.
Right.
That's the way people used to think.
Yeah.
And so thinking about it instead in terms of this ongoing system integrated with other systems, and thinking about where was me as a cog in that system, where was I going to start and where was I going to end, and how can I do that part differently?
Yeah.
But yeah, let's talk about the way in which a building or a series of buildings can impact a community. I don't know, maybe there's an example of something you can talk about from past work. I really liked the library, the Madbury Library.
Yeah.
That's a really cool building. And public libraries are so important.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe in particular that one, it felt like it really drew attention to that space and the importance of that space, and maybe made people appreciate the fact that they had a public library. What a miracle that we still have public libraries.
Yeah.
But yeah, so let's talk about that. What are ways in which a building can make a difference?
Yeah, well, outside of that particular project, in general and abstractly talking about a building in a community, it is inherently change, and people have a mixed relationship with change and the future and the fear of the unknown. So when you're talking about a building and the place where you're going to build and the people it will affect, what sort of effect can that have on people? It's a slow process of coming to embrace the idea of making a building, and people have a lot of questions. Beyond what is it going to look like? Just the mere fact of change. So that's something that has to be recognized, no matter where you're building or what you're building. For the Madbury Public Library, I think there's so much positive in that process, in that community. Of course, they had the same questions. They wanted a library to begin with. And yes, as an aside, it's remarkable that they made that library. They didn't even have the institution of a public library until into the 21st century. This old New Hampshire village, rural New Hampshire village, they didn't actually have a public library. And so the fact that within about 20 years, a little less than 20 years, they went from no library to having established a library, grown interest in having a library, and then funding the construction of a new library designated to that purpose. A lot of times you go through a period of living in another building, which they did. They started in a closet in Town Hall, and then they moved into a kind of mid-century ranch house that was, before that, the police station, which before that it presumably was somebody's house, but but I'm not excuse me, I'm not sure about the history before that. So they bounced around a little bit, and then they finally came around to making this library. And what good fortune it was for Placework to be chosen to do that building. You know, all kinds of reasons from an architect's perspective, of course, but bigger than that, just to be involved in the community process and see what they went through and kind of help facilitate that. We didn't facilitate the discussions literally, but we gave them the things they needed to know to have the discussions they needed to have to embrace and support the idea of building a library. And that was one of the greatest, most rewarding things about the project. And there was healthy dialogue around this library. One of the things that they wanted, they called this a library, but underneath that, what they were really looking for was a community center. It's a rural village, as I mentioned, and they, prior to the library being built, they had a small handful of municipal buildings. They had the town hall and the safety complex, police and fire. These two things are nowhere near each other. There's really, not much of a town center. And so this represented a big change for the community. And they didn't have a commercial downtown where they could go and meet at the post office or bump into their neighbors in the coffee shop. So that's one of the things they wanted most. They also wanted a place for small children who weren't in school yet, like toddlers. So they wanted the children's library. And those were kind of the drivers to the project, a children's space and a community space.
By the way, I've done a lot of work with libraries recently, and those twin priorities, community gathering space and programming for young kids, they are universal desires. Every library in every community wants that, and a lot of them are achieving it. And
they still wanted the library element, of course, because they had these books, and that was an important part of it. So that was that I think represents meaningful impact on the community that they had the gumption to make that happen, and that we got to be part of that. And in the end, they're very happy with what they ended up with.
Yeah, there's so many communities like that in New Hampshire that are these kind of like scattered municipalities with no central gathering space. Mm-hmm. And when you create that, when you create a gathering space for that community, you really stitch the place together.
Yeah.
And I don't know about other states, if other states have those kind of places like where you're, like there's the major pins on the map in New Hampshire, and then there's like 6 towns in between where you're
right.
like, am I in this town or that town
yeah.
right now? Am I in Union right now or Middleton?
Yeah.
You don't really know because they don't have like a defined center.
Right.
So that is, I don't even really know how those communities came to exist in the first place. It feels like that was it wasn't the first version of a town, because it used to be when they built a New England village, they built like the town hall and the church first.
Yeah, exactly. And everybody gathers around that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think we can in part thank the automobile for that. And, some towns did their growing in the age of single person transportation, everybody having a car. Also at that time in New Hampshire, the Department of Transportation, as I understand it, had a real focus on moving people through New Hampshire, getting them into the places they want to be, the recreation places. And so the concept of bypasses around towns came about. And in that case, we then see these towns that actually did have a center and grew around a church and a town hall or a Grange hall, and had a vibrant downtown village feel start to wane because people didn't drive through them anymore. And some may say, oh, that's great to relieve traffic through the town, but it also it diverts the life around the town on that bypass. And that's That's partly to do with the way we see some towns in New Hampshire right now.
Yeah. So I'm from Wolfboro, New Hampshire,
yeah.
and people always complain about the traffic through downtown. But this is sort of an illuminating thought that whether this is intentional or not, that's why they've never fixed it, right?
Yeah.
Because people always comment on the downtown of Wolfboro, New Hampshire as being a very vibrant, happening place. Yeah. I mean, personally, having grown up there, it doesn't really offer me anything,
Right.
But I still now, when I drove through it last weekend, and I sort of saw it with new eyes.
Yeah.
I haven't been through there in a year, so I did especially see it with new eyes.
Yeah.
But that's a very interesting thought. I think I've heard and understood a little bit of that idea of like the way that the car created the suburbs, created isolation, but I've never quite heard it put that specifically with the bypasses going around, and removing that centrality to a town. That's very interesting.
Yeah, it's sort of, people are the lifeblood to these towns, and if people get in cars and drive around the town, then the town is deprived of that lifeblood. And there were other impacts, of course, too. It was at the same time that we started designing on the module of an automobile, our downtowns, and we started altering downtowns to respond to that. And instead of designing on the module of a human being, we're now designing on the module of the car they drive and making parking places and removing buildings to make more parking places, and that has obvious impacts on downtowns.
Are you telling me that the Pixar movie Cars was actually like cutting social satire and I just didn't notice because I was bored?
We talked about Pixar movies we haven't seen for a couple of minutes here, so I'm just going to jump ahead to when we started talking about accessibility, a recurring topic on this show lately.
I have two branching questions from this point.
Yeah.
So one of them's about accessibility.
Sure.
And not just physical accessibility, but also financial accessibility. Because I'm a homeowner of modest means, and I want to try to make my house more sustainable, more energy efficient. But there's limited stuff that I can do, right? With the cheap old house that I bought.
Yes.
And so, but I know that's changing some. I mean, I can tell just by the proliferation of solar panels that solar panels are getting cheaper. But for you as architects, right, who want to help people, your website says architecture is for everyone, right? But you still have to run a business. How do you balance that? And is that changing? Is sustainability becoming more accessible?
I think yes. I think just by virtue of it being more broadly recognized and the need for doing better with our buildings, I think it's the market is responding to that, and in our capitalist society, that's where it starts. The market has to respond to the needs and proliferate so that the costs can come within range. And I think we are moving toward that. There's more acceptance of better practices, and the market is producing the things that we need to fulfill those practices. The other side of that is, while we've spent many years, decades of developing technology and making sustainability a technological issue with solar panels or high-performance building envelopes, these things come at a cost. There are expenses to that, and we do get into the conversations with, why would I pay more money to have this? And you have to extend that conversation into the money. Talk about, in addition to the money that you're spending now, the money that you're saving later. And you also have to equate other things into that value assessment besides money, like impact. So while we have worked hard at addressing this through technology, we also are coming to recognize that even though we can make the argument about what the true cost is, generally in our society, in economy, we have, rising expenses and diminishing means, or not necessarily diminishing means, but means that aren't rising at the same rate as the expenses of the commodities. So we have to recognize that in the design process, how we plan buildings and how do we make this more accessible. There's conversation going on about that. Maybe high performance is, coupled with other things like just simple products like using LED lights or low flow plumbing fixtures. We have to make compromises in the middle there, and which I can hardly believe that I'm hearing this coming out of my mouth. I'm a staunch advocate for making the building perform so we can reduce the impact and be responsible in that regard. But it'd be foolish not to recognize we have to do better more broadly and do what it takes to do that.
The accessibility issues with sustainable material just happened to me, by the way. We needed to replace our roof when it started to leak this summer, and for weeks we met with a truly staggering amount of roofers trying to make the numbers work for a metal roof. Now, all of these roofing companies, they prefer to do shingles anyway, and they all have a bunch of fantastical claims about how their shingles last longer and insulate better than metal anyway. Each type is infused with some kind of proprietary imaginary material that allows them to charge an extra $5,000, but even if it is true that shingles last just as long, when they come back off of your house, the shingles go to a landfill and the metal roof doesn't. And that alone was important enough to pursue it until it became clear that, and the pandemic is partly to blame for this, the cost of metal was just extraordinarily prohibitive. I mean, like a $20,000 difference at minimum. There was just no way. So now I have a new roof, shingles. It's the most anticlimactic thing I've ever spent money on in my life. It looks pretty much the same.
Yeah. Sometimes it's like there are places where you can take a huge step forward, and there are places where you can just kind of tiptoe forward.
And the tiptoeing counts, right?
Yeah, you got to do both.
Yeah.
Okay, so my second question, has the pandemic moved the needle on any of this stuff?
I have a huge hope that it's pointing us toward, in a more focused way, toward something that was already percolating before the pandemic. Mm-hmm. It's a couple of things. One is housing. We've been grappling with housing, especially here in the Seacoast and our region, throughout the state, in fact. And it just, the truth is it's all over. We have a housing shortage and an affordability issue. There are all kinds of things happening because of the pandemic, but I think they collectively underscore the housing situation that we're in. In fact, some call it a housing crisis. We don't have enough housing in the right places. So my hope is that we'll see not just more units, because I've never felt like that's the way to address our housing situation. It's not just a number of units. We don't just need to throw more units into the mix. We need to be more thoughtful about what those units are, what they look like, how we define a housing unit, and more importantly, where are we putting them, and how do we integrate them into a place that exists. And that's the other part of it that is my even higher hope, is that we move toward a new attitude about urbanism. At this moment, more than half of the world's population lives in an urban area. And that is a first in the recorded history of humans. And we're still migrating in that direction. They're not all going to the megalopolis. They're not all going to New York City or London. They're going, and in fact, they can't because of affordability and accessibility issues. So they're going to smaller cities, and even smaller and smaller cities like Portsmouth. And I think that is the city of the future, the small cities, and where we can enhance that urban environment. And it is, in fact, urban. You don't have to be a giant city like Boston or New York to be considered urban. Here in Portsmouth, we share resources. There are overlaps of systems like you find in cities. And socially and culturally, very much like a city in that way. And I think now is the time to embrace that and lean into that and grow that, cultivate those kinds of centers. And I am interested in the concept, and I'm sure others have invented this. I don't know. This is just the way it strikes my mind, and I haven't found exactly who's talking about this, but the concept of rural urbanism, these small towns that we have in New Hampshire that we were talking about a moment ago that already have resources and infrastructure in place, how can we cultivate those places as comfortable places for people, and where we can live near our jobs, share resources, and have less impact.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a good thought to end on, because we've done about 50 minutes. So that was really awesome. Thank you for taking the time to talk to me about this.
Yeah, thank you for provoking me with these questions and getting my wheels turning. It was really nice talking with you.
So I saw this movie recently called Captain Fantastic, which I was surprised to learn was Oscar nominated, because I had literally never heard of it. And it definitely has the exterior markings of an indie movie that went straight to a streaming service and just got immediately algorithmically buried forever. But it came highly recommended by a couple of hosts of the Filmcast, which is a movie podcast that I listened to religiously 10 years ago, and now I find myself a listener again. It is a great show. These guys have been doing it for 15 years. It's incredible that a podcast can even be that old. David Chen, the host, is, I think, a really undersung hero of podcasting. What's funny is that although his podcast is about movies, I see him as more of a moral guiding light. He's always had a very strong sense of proper conduct at the movie theater, and that moral sensibility extends outward from time to time on the air, and I definitely have the sense that his thinking has sharpened and his moral compass has become better tuned, in part by virtue of talking about it on a microphone all of the time. Having to organize and present your thoughts on a regular basis will do that. Anyway, Captain Fantastic is a movie about a father who lives off the grid with his kids and trains them, teaches them to survive in the wilderness, but he's also trying to raise them to be free thinkers. Philosopher kings is the phrase that he uses. It's on the quirky scale, this movie. But it does something interesting with its quirkiness, at least initially, which is that it weaponizes it against the audience. There's this scene early on in which the father is forcing his young children, to scale a sheer rock face, and one of his sons breaks his arm when he slips. The father encourages him to continue to climb, and he does, and it's all happening during a training montage with cheerful music, and you only barely stop to think, Jesus, this guy almost got his kids killed. Later, when the movie wants you to start questioning the father's judgment as he begins to do himself, you reconsider that moment on the mountain. And the movie really starts to be less about a quirky family and more about the anxiety of bringing life into a broken world and the different ways that you can overreact to that responsibility. I've been thinking about climate change a lot. First there was that UN report, and now all the fires and floods, but honestly, weirdly, the straw that almost broke me is the way that other people talk about it. I have seen lately so many variations on we are so unprepared for climate change that it's become the new let that sink in on Twitter. I've also seen an even darker sentiment, one that I've brought up on this show before, which is friends of mine saying that they know they can never have kids now because of all that is going on. I don't agree with that, obviously, since I have 2 kids. In fact, I feel the literal opposite way, and very consciously had children in the face of this stuff. The mounting anger and the misinformation and the violence and the environmental destruction out there are forces that we all must overcome. We cannot shrink from them in any way. We can't give up on the future, and we can't give up any ground. We have to fight forward all the time, and we have to believe in it. I really think that's so important. Our belief in it is the reason that it works. In Captain Fantastic, the father quotes Noam Chomsky, who said, "If you assume that there is no hope, you guarantee that there will be no hope." And the inclusion of that little line is what sold me on the movie. And that sentiment is what draws me to people like Brian Murphy and gets me so excited about the possibility of, the fact of regeneration. We're gonna do this, you know. We're gonna be okay. Thank you for listening. We will be back soon. I actually mean that this time. Have a good week.
Got up and went over to his garden. Fries had disappeared. Captain, maybe it was pirates.